Hello, and welcome to the annual Federal Way Public Schools McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Training. This training is mandatory for all McKinney-Vento liaisons, at least one building admin, and any other staff who will be in contact with McKinney-Vento and foster care scholars, including office staff and data secretaries. We're looking forward to our work this year in service of our McKinney-Vento scholars. Here, you'll see an overview of our agenda for the day, which includes an introduction to McKinney-Vento, scholar rights and services, the McKinney-Vento intake process, Title I and the financial request form, your role as a school-based liaison and strategies that you can use within your role, an overview of foster care and best interest determination meetings and resources, as well as some other liaison resources that you can use, such as the McKinney-Vento Yammer page. First, let's review our learning targets for today. Today, you will learn or be reminded of some data regarding our homeless scholars and how homelessness can have a huge impact on their lives and education. You'll learn about or be refreshed on the requirements for scholar eligibility for the McKinney-Vento program, as well as the services and rights that our homeless scholars have access to. Before jumping into that, let's start with the basics of the McKinney-Vento program. Take a look at some of the statistics regarding homeless youth. While the graduation rate for all scholars is 80.8%, for homeless scholars it's only 55.5%. This same discrepancy can be seen in the dropout rate, 11.2% for all scholars and 28% for homeless scholars. In addition to these impacts, youth experiencing homelessness have a higher risk of gang affiliation, drug use, depression, and suicide than scholars who are not homeless. School can be a huge challenge for our homeless scholars. Some scholars experiencing homelessness may be sleeping so far from school that getting to class the next day and staying awake during class is a challenge. Sometimes these scholars can change schools frequently, and that impacts their ability to not only receive a sustained education, but to also form relationships and build friendships. This is where McKinney-Vento comes in. The McKinney-Vento Act is in place to ensure that homeless scholars have access to school, are able to have stability within their education and social life. The Act defines homelessness as a lack of a fixed and adequate residence. Let's do a quick quiz to test your knowledge about McKinney-Vento eligibility. Jot down your answer or answers to compare on the next screen. Which scholars are eligible for McKinney-Vento according to the Act's definition of homelessness? A. Those sharing the housing of other persons due to loss of housing, economic reasons, etc. B. Those living in motels, hotels, trailer parks, or camping grounds due to lack of alternative accommodations. C. Those living in emergency or transitional shelters. D. Those living in public or a private place not designed for people to live. E. Those living in cars, parks, abandoned buildings, substandard housing, bus stations, or similar settings. Or F. All of the above. Take a moment to jot down your answers. Thank you for taking that quick little quiz. The correct answer to the question is F, all of the above. Okay, let's talk about what it means when a scholar is part of the McKinney-Vento program. Again, the goal is to ensure scholars have access to stable education that does not make them feel alienated or targeted. Scholars have certain rights when they have been enrolled in the program. These rights include prompt identification. This means that there have to be targeted efforts made by school staff to identify scholars needing services. Though we will go through more methods later, one idea for identification is through housing questionnaires distributed at the beginning of each school year and upon new school and mid-year enrollment. Remember, this identification process is active, not passive. Don't wait for scholars to self identify. Use the strategies we will review. Keep your eyes peeled for the signals. Be diligent and proactive. Another right is immediate enrollment. 62% of McKinney-Vento scholars said that proof of residency requirements posed a major challenge when enrolling for school. To combat that, students eligible for McKinney-Vento have a right to enrollment immediately into school, regardless of any ability to provide documentation like medical forms, medication, and special education documentation. Enrollment and full participation means that there will be no financial or other barriers prohibiting scholars from enrolling in school activities. This includes fees or payment for uniforms and other necessary items. Our homeless scholars are also entitled to an education that is of the same rigor as non-homeless scholars. When thinking about the importance of having a stable education, a very important right that McKinney-Vento scholars have is that they are able to attend their school of origin. Their school of origin is the school that they last attended, the school they attended when they became homeless, or the school in the neighborhood of the place where they slept last night. Scholars are also entitled to no-cost supportive services, including tutoring, transportation to and from school, which could mean a bus card or taxi, and other services. McKinney-Vento scholars are also eligible for free and reduced lunch and the array of benefits that come with that eligibility. Before we move on, let's start with the basics of the McKinney-Vento program. Here you'll see the McKinney-Vento intake process, which is as follows. A scholar is identified as being eligible for McKinney-Vento. The building liaison submits an intake form to the McKinney-Vento liaison. At the same time, the building liaison works with the scholar and family to provide services checked on the form that aren't transportation. After the McKinney-Vento office receives the intake form from the building liaison, the McKinney-Vento office then processes the intake form and sends the transportation request, if applicable, to the transportation department, which will then alert the family when transportation has been arranged. The McKinney-Vento office then alerts the school that the intake has been processed. In order to have an intake process for a scholar that you have identified as potentially being able to qualify for McKinney-Vento, you will want to submit a McKinney-Vento intake form. This form is used once the scholar has been identified as meeting McKinney-Vento requirements. Make sure to fill out the form as completely as possible and submit the form to McKinney-Vento at FWPS.org. In the services section of the form, if transportation is checked, please be aware that the McKinney-Vento office will handle the transportation request. Any other services that are checked should be addressed by the building liaison through the appropriate request and referral processes. Title I includes funds that are set aside to support scholars who are enrolled in McKinney-Vento. Let's review the who, what, when, why, and how of how to use Title I funds for your McKinney-Vento scholars in need. McKinney-Vento scholars are eligible to receive support through Title I for the entire school year, even after their housing becomes permanent. Other school and community resources must be exhausted before the use of these funds. To access these funds, building liaisons may purchase goods using a P card, purchase order, or journal entry. There is an excessive amount of funds available, so please ensure that you are requesting funding whenever needed. Let's review some of what the allowable requests are. Some of the allowable P card requests include items of clothing and shoes necessary for participation in classes, personal school supplies such as backpacks and notebooks, the acquisition of birth certificates, immunizations, food for homeless students, which won't include buying meals at restaurants, eyeglasses and hearing aids, fees for AP, IB, SAT, ACT, and GED testing, only for scholars who aren't eligible for a waiver, as well as college entrance exam fees and graduation cap and gown. Allowable purchase order expenses include medical and dental services, counseling services related to homeless issues that are impeding the scholar's learning, outreach services, before and after school, Saturday and summer extended learning time, tutoring services, parental involvement costs, costs that parents participating in Head Start or Even Start for attaining a GED, tutoring services, shoes necessary to participate in PE, and homeless awareness activities. Schools, through journal entry, can request funds for student district fees that are necessary to participate in the general education program and extracurricular district activity fees. Here are some purchases that are not allowed with Title I funds: rent or temporary lodgings, driver's test fees, prom gowns or tuxedos, clothing for family members, yearbook fees, class pictures, or class rings. In order to request Title I assistance, please fill out the appropriate Title I McKinney-Vento Program Requests for Financial Assistance form. This form will be returned to the McKinney-Vento facilitator at the McKinney-Vento@FWPS.org email. So, where do you, the building level site-based liaison, come in? Before we get into that, let's review the difference between the district liaison, who is the facilitator of equity, McKinney-Vento, and foster care, and you, the building or site-based liaison. These roles and their responsibilities can be confusing, so this may help. The district liaison, who's the facilitator of equity, McKinney-Vento, and foster care, identifies, qualifies, and processes intakes for McKinney-Vento scholars, follows up with families and coordinates services, helps to make community connections and build a repository of resources, and establishes partnerships with community partners. The building liaison, which is you, helps also with identifying scholars at the building level and sending intakes to the district liaison, looks out for signs that may point to homelessness, reaches out to the district liaison for resources and questions, and also provides resources at the building level to support scholars. You are the leader of McKinney-Vento identification and delivery efforts in your building. You will lead efforts to identify scholars experiencing homelessness. This means looking out for signs that may point to homelessness, informing other school staff about McKinney-Vento services, providing building level supports to students and families experiencing homelessness. The McKinney-Vento liaison is here as a resource to you in your efforts to provide resources to scholars. Building liaison identification strategies. It's all about asking the right questions. Some questions that you can use to find out if housing is regular. Do you stay in the same place every night? Do you have a key to the place where you're living? Do you move around a lot? What do you like about where you're living? What don't you like about it? Here are some questions to find out if the living situation is fixed. Are you staying with friends or relatives just for a little while? How long have you lived there? How long do you plan to live there? What would happen if your friends or relatives asked you to leave? Are you all sharing the home equally, or are you more like guests in the home? Do you have affordable housing? There are also questions you can ask to find out if a scholar's living situation is adequate, such as how many people are living in your house? How many bedrooms does your house have? Are you sharing a room with anybody else? Are you sleeping in a bedroom or a public area like a dining room? Does the home have heat or electricity or running water? Are you comfortable where you're living now? The next portion of our training will be regarding foster care. Educators, caregivers, and other professionals are critical partners in effectively meeting the needs of students in Washington's child welfare system. Strengthening partnerships between educators, child welfare caseworkers, court representatives, and caregivers is essential to improving the outcomes of students impacted by foster care. It is important that students in the foster care system are seen as our children and not the sole responsibility of any one system or group. Through partnership and coordination, we can accomplish the goal of improving the educational experience and outcomes for students in foster care. Lower educational achievement has a significant ripple effect, leading to other difficult circumstances. Studies show that many foster care alumni experience higher rates of unemployment and homelessness and are more likely to face economic hardships in adulthood. Research suggests that education is a critical component to positively impacting the life paths of young people who experience foster care. Success in school can be a positive counterbalance to the challenges students have experienced. Whether students are in the foster care system for short or long periods of time, their education is important for long-term success. Here are some foster care fast facts. The definition of foster care is that a scholar is 24 hours a day, temporary substitute care placed away from their parents or guardians. DCYF, previously known as DSHF, or a licensed or certified child placing agency, has placement care responsibility. This includes any out-of-home care, including a relative or suitable person, so long as the child is under the placement and care responsibility of DCYF and placed in out-of-home care by DCYF. Important to know about enrollment of foster care scholars is that scholars must be enrolled immediately, even if they don't have the documents that are required to enroll in school. Scholars have the right to attend either their neighborhood school or their school of origin. Scholars who meet the criteria above and also meet the criteria of McKinney-Vento can also be qualified and served under both programs. The top things to know about students in foster care are that trauma and adverse experiences may impact scholars' learning and behavior. As a result of trauma and adverse childhood experiences, students in foster care may show signs of depression or anxiety and may have trouble socializing with their peers and trusted adults. It's so important to maintain confidentiality and sensitivity. Students don't want to be stigmatized as foster care children and often do not want school staff or their peers to know they're in foster care. Students communicate that this label has negative connotations and can be embarrassing and shameful. School staff have to make every effort to protect the privacy of students in foster care and respect the sensitive nature of their situations. Students in foster care have many strengths. They have many talents. They are resilient. They have friendships and caring family members and relationships with other supportive adults. These strengths should be celebrated, nurtured, supported, and integrated into student engagement strategies. Students enter foster care through no fault of their own and have experienced abusive and neglectful environments. Common concerns include the long-term effects of experiencing chronic abuse and neglect at the hands of a caretaker, exposure to drugs and or alcohol, and witnessing domestic violence or other criminal behavior. For example, students in foster care may have challenges related to attachment and bonding that can affect motivation, engagement, and student performance. They've experienced tremendous loss, and they may be a mobile population. Due to a variety of circumstances, students might have to relocate to new homes and communities even after their initial placement. Transitions and school moves may happen quickly, meaning students are not able to say goodbye to their current school relationships. Next, let's review the foster care intake process. If a scholar indicates they may be eligible for foster care, request a school notification form from the DCYF social worker. Send the school notification form along with any court-provided documents to McKinney-Vento at FWPS.org and notify the foster care liaison if transportation is needed, making sure to provide any details needed, such as special schedules for services like visitation, counseling, court, etc. At that point, the McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Office processes the intake and sends the transportation request, if applicable, to the Transportation Department. The Transportation Department will alert the guardian when transportation has been arranged. The McKinney-Vento and Foster Care Office will alert the school that the intake has been processed. So, where do the building level and site-based liaison come in? The facilitator of Equity McKinney-Vento and foster care will help to identify, qualify, and process intakes for foster care scholars. They'll follow up with social workers and guardians and coordinate services. And they'll make community connections and build resources, as well as establish partnerships with community partners. You come in by ensuring the receipt of the school notification form from the social worker and send intakes to district liaison. You'll attend the best interest determination meetings when you're invited, and you'll look out for signs that may point to homelessness, as these scholars may qualify for McKinney-Vento. You'll reach out to the district liaison for resources and questions in the service of scholars and provide resources at the building level to support scholars. Next, we will review the best interest determination meeting. What are some of the things considered in a best interest determination meeting, also known as a bid meeting? We should be considering consistency for the scholar. Children in foster care enroll or remain in the school of origin unless there's a determination that it is not in his or her best interest to attend the school of origin. We also want to consider how close the scholar's home is to school. Is the current educational setting right for the scholar? And what does the child or caretaker want in this situation? Transportation costs should not be a factor in the decision. If appropriate, the scholar must remain in school while awaiting a decision to reduce the number of school moves. The bid team should consult the child and meaningful adults, if appropriate, to help make a decision. And if the bid team cannot come to a decision, then the DCYF caseworker should make the final determination. Other considerations to keep in mind during a bid meeting is the preference of the scholar or educational decision maker, the school climate, the scholar's attachment to the school, their IEP or 504 needs, the placement of the scholar's siblings, and educational and social emotional needs of the scholar. As we come to the end of our training, Please be aware of the following district contacts and resources for McKinney-Vento and foster care. Thank you for sticking with us through our presentation. We are looking forward to connecting with you this school year in service of our McKinney-Vento and foster care scholars. And we in the Office of Equity and McKinney-Vento team are looking forward to hearing from you with any questions or concerns. Thank you.